that people don't realize it. The Bitcoin plays. Nobody ever wastes a thought on it. You need to be sure that what you're taking here is the real thing and not something that is a scam. The need of governments to pay for their expenses made governments very inventive. Suddenly everybody realizes, wait, как je to sve tak skupo? At the age, I don't trust any statistic that I haven't forged myself.
Hello everyone, welcome to another episode of Horizons of Leadership. Today we're happy to have with us Professor Peter Schmidt. Peter is a senior lecturer at RIT Croatia with over 13 years of experience in teaching. His expertise in accounting, taxation, inflation, money and Bitcoin have not just had a big impact on myself personally, but on a large number of other students as well. As a mentor of a Bitcoin club at RIT, he has inspired and guided numerous students in exploring this technology. Professor Schmidt, I'm so happy to have you with us today.
Thank you for having me, and I'm glad to hear all this, and great that you're doing this podcast.
So, Professor, you invented a whole one course at RIT called Money, Inflation and Bitcoin. You've been speaker on a number of conferences, and you've been club mentor for over 50 students. Can you tell me, what is driving you and on what mission are you right now?
I realized when I understood how Bitcoin works that this needs to be seen in the wider context of how money works. Money is a weird thing. We use it all the time, every day, and nobody ever wastes a thought on it. We just kind of think it works the way it should work, until we actually start looking a little deeper. And so after Bitcoin came around, there was a reason to examine how money works because we had now an alternative. So that is something I understood, I studied, and I think that is something that students, particularly students of business, but any young person needs to understand how money works and what alternatives there are. So that's the motivation and the mission.
Yes, of course. Can we start from the scratch, from beginning? How would you define money and what purpose does it actually serve?
One of my favorite pictures in beginning presentations is a picture of the Neanderthal Museum in Krapina. So there is a scene in the museum of a bunch of people comfortably in their cave, and essentially they have nothing but a little bit of fur pelts and maybe some simple tools, and here they are. And so I put up this slide and I asked my students, so what's missing here? This is like the vicinity of Zagreb. This is like less than an hour away from Zagreb. It doesn't look like that anymore today. And then we realize everything's missing, all the stuff that we consider normal in our lives, starting with clothes, with beds, with apartments, with furniture. And so we wonder, how is this made? How did we ever get from the cave to our modern life? Well, the answer is simple. Somebody built all these things. But not one person can do this all. It needs the cooperation, the coordinated cooperation of many people. Many people specialize, increase their productivity at what they're doing. They produce clothes, but then at some point they will need food. So there is a need for exchange. And now we're getting to the money. If we do exchange one thing for another, what is called barter, that is tremendously tedious if it ever worked. Anthropologists discuss this. But if we manage to introduce an intermediate exchange technology, like let's say a token that represents value and everybody agrees on that, that would make coordination a lot easier, and that is what money does. So instead of exchanging your cow for 700 deliveries of bread, you can now take tokens for your cow. And then, whenever you're ready, you can buy bread as you like. So we have effectively decoupled one barter into two trades. And that is the cool thing about money. It enables the coordination very efficiently if it is good money.
Can you maybe tell us like what are the core characteristics that make something called money, that money needs to have in order to be money?
So many things can be money in more or less of a qualified way. Money is nothing that is ever given to people, but money is a technology that is emergent among people. People discover that something works as money, and over the history we have many colorful examples of things that served as money. In the end, it turned out that gold was a really good token. Before that, we had glossy seashells, wampum shells, cowrie shells that worked great, glass beads that worked well. All these things will work to some extent as money, in as much as they fulfill monetary properties.
Great. So what is like today's money? Can you compare today money and how was it in the past? You said we had a trade-off for like people were trading off cows for some goods, and then we have this misception. So can you kind of touch on that, like how is it today and how was it in the past?
Yeah, so this boils down to monetary properties. What kind of properties does the money we use have? And those are a few. I mean, I like to limit the list to 5 in my classes. The money that works well needs to be divisible. So you cannot exchange a cow against a loaf of bread. You need something more finely grained. It needs to be durable. So it needs to last also until next year maybe. Or maybe even until your retirement if you want to save for that. Then it needs to be transportable. You need to be able to take it along with you because you might want to spend it in the next town. And then it needs to be recognizable. You need to be sure that what you're taking here is the real thing and not something that is a scam. But the most important one I saved for last, and that is it needs to be scarce. We can use glossy seashells for money, which are hard to find, but we cannot use pebbles that we find on the beach, because that defies the purpose of facilitating the exchange. Now, over time, many of the monies that humanity has used have fulfilled these properties in one way or another, better or worse. But somehow, over the last 100 years or so, we ended up with paper money and with digital numbers on computer screens. Now, those are really good at most of the monetary properties, except one. They failed miserably in terms of scarcity, because they can be produced at will, and that is what causes a lot of economic problems in our lives today.
You mentioned that the gold was a good monetary policy, so can you just touch on that, like why is the gold a good one and why did we transfer from gold to money that we know today?
Well, gold is a reasonably good one, and it was a good one, particularly in times where mobility was not the main issue. Gold is scarce. However, it has deficiencies in the context of divisibility. Now, go buy a sandwich with gold. It must be a very small piece of gold, very hard to even verify that it is gold. Then recognizability is not a strong side of gold. So here's a gold bar, you tell me, how do I know this is really gold? How do I know it's not only gold around it and inside is some cheap metal? Yeah, I could find that out if I had a laboratory, but it's not a very easy thing to do in everyday trading. And then another aspect is the weight. So go carry around or transfer $1 million worth in gold, and that will be a major endeavor, not only to transport it, but also to secure it, let alone that it is physical and you need to move it from here to there, much unlike immaterial ways of money.
When we talk about gold, we have one interesting story about the German kid that bring the gold bars to the bank and sold them, and they didn't even realize. They just realized after like some time after.
That was a story I shared in the lecture, yes, and that is always interesting because indeed a real case, I believe in 2015, 2016, a German kid, age 18 at the time, actually managed to sell several gold bars to his local bank, and the local bank was fine with that. He came up with a story of a grandma, and he never told that he got the money, I mean the gold, at eBay for a few dollars. And it took weeks or months for the bank to figure out that they had been had. So much about the recognizability of gold.
So today we have transferred from gold and we have something called monetary system, fiat money. Can you explain us how does today's monetary system actually function and how does it serve to us?
So we make a very big jump now from exchanging gold in sort of pre-modern times to monetary systems as they have emerged during the 19th and 20th century.
How have they emerged? Like what?
They have emerged in the sense that the need of governments to pay for their expenses made governments very inventive. And inventive in the sense that they have decided that they will put the whole monetary system of their country under their control through a central bank and an underlying banking system. So essentially, without having much material here, let's imagine the issuance of money as a balance sheet. On the liability side is the money, and on the asset side is something that backs this money. And that used to be gold. And even in early central banks, like let's say 100+ years ago, that used to be what balance sheets of central banks looked like. But then the desire for spending more money was too big to resist for governments. So instead of respecting the limit of the gold, which at a certain exchange rate, gold to dollars or gold to fiat currency in general terms, would limit the amount of money that could be issued, they secretly made more, and more. And so the liability side of that balance sheet kept growing.
So
they making people believe that it's all good, here's the gold, here's the money. But like every scam, at some point it blows up. And in the case of central banks and the gold standard, that was in 1971 when the bluff was called, and Richard Nixon, then President of the United States, had to suspend the convertibility of dollars into gold at given exchange rates, which still existed at that time at the nation-state level. So ever since then, gold as the asset disappeared in the central bank balance sheets and was replaced by another asset, government debt. So debt is the debt of the person who took the money, but the person who invested into this debt, for them, the debt is an asset. So if you buy treasury bonds, you have an asset. If the Federal Reserve Bank holds treasury bonds, it holds an asset. So that asset now backs the money. It has one amazing quality, though. You can very easily make more of it. So essentially, 1971, when the gold backing was given up for good, that meant that there was no limit to how long the Federal Reserve balance sheet could grow. And it has grown and grown and grown and grown and grown and grown and grown again in COVID to unbelievable proportions. If you look at the charts, you'd be like, what is this, a scam? Nobody sees those charts, nobody looks at those charts. It's almost like you don't want to know the truth. But the truth is kind of slowly fermenting on the back burner, and we're wondering where this will lead.
What are some risks to this? Like, we have it connected to debt, and what a risk? Is it inflation? Is it just this debt, centralization? What's the risk of today's monetary system?
So if we use money, fiat money as we have today, in the form of paper, which is the smallest amount, and then in the form of electronic money on bank computers, so to speak, then the biggest problem here is that the amount of it grows and grows and grows, and with the amount grows the debt, because all money is debt in an accounting sense. And that is very obvious if you dig deeper, and it is not at all a secret. You can read a beautiful article of 2014 of the Bank of England where they lay it out in much detail in their quarterly bulletin. Anyone can find that easily by Googling 2014 quarterly bulletin of the Bank of England. Read through those very dense articles and you will know all the accounting behind it. It is essentially an unlimited method of producing more and more money. And producing more and more money has a bunch of unpleasant consequences. First of all, there is more money, but that money was not created by producing more stuff and selling that, like you would usually have to earn your money. If you want to spend money, you have to produce something to the economy so that you get that money. Now, if you were somebody who could just print money, essentially go to the copy machine and copy whatever you have in your wallet today, and then go shopping with those copies, what have you done? You are taking out, because the money is essentially a voucher for you to claim real goods and real services from the economy, but you have not pitched in anything. That means you are now you're creating demand in the economy, and that means your demand is additional demand to the demand that already existed before. Now, if we have more money chasing the unchanged amount of real goods and services, then what will happen? The prices will go up. And that is also something that has been known for centuries. I've just recently discovered a beautiful book from the late 19th century about the American currency, history of the American currency. And the author lays this out in simple terms very clearly. I think the book is from 1867. Milton Friedman is on tape saying this in the 1970s, the Nobel Prize winner, monetarist of Milton Friedman. Nothing of that is secret, or nothing of that should be unknown, but nobody wants to hear that somehow. Until now, where we suddenly struggle with inflation, suddenly everybody realizes, wait, kak je to sve tak skupo? And a little while ago, a cake cost 19 kuna, and now it costs the equivalent of 35 kuna or something like that. So that is the consequence of what we're facing. And there is one more consequence that is essentially the same effect. If you understand the system, it's very easy to avoid the disadvantages. But if you don't understand the system, you suffer. Now, who understands the system? Of course, those people who are deeply in the system. That means rich people. If you're rich, it'll be very easy for you to avoid the unpleasant effects of inflation because you can play them in your favor. If the value of money declines, well then how about you have negative value of money, and that means you go into debt. Then that debt will also decline, all the while feeding your hard assets that you bought with collateralized debt because you're rich, And so inflation will make you richer and richer and richer if you play the system, just like it makes other people poorer and poorer and poorer that cannot play the system because A, they don't understand it, and B, if they did understand it, they wouldn't have the collateral to play it in a big scope.
Can we say that inflation is then tax to poor people?
It works the same way, essentially. So you earn 5,000, you pay 2,500 in tax, and you can spend 2,500. The insidious aspect of taking people's purchase money through inflation is that people don't realize it. So you have 5,000, you still have 5,000 next month, but the 5,000 buy you less. Maybe after 2 years, after 3 years, after 7 years, they will buy you half of what 5,000 used to buy. Now the irony, why nobody gets this, is because you still have 5,000.
Would you say that today is like there's a lot of manipulation with data, especially government, like in the way when we talk about inflation, they like to say, oh, inflation dropped down to 2-3% or something like that. But like if we look in the past, it has just grown and grown and grown.
You may have heard the old adage, I don't trust any statistic that I haven't forged myself. So the way inflation is officially measured by consumer price inflation indexes and so forth is a highly, highly stylized way of coming up with numbers that are as low as humanly possible to hide as much of inflation as they can. Now, in fact, what we should be seeing with technical progress, and I mentioned the increase of productivity a little while ago in our conversation, technical progress should make us all more productive, should make us all be able to produce more things. If we have more things, the prices of things should go down. So even constant prices would already be an anomaly. We face rising prices, and that is an indication of how much we're cheated through the monetary system by institutions that produce more vouchers that enable them to buy goods than were ever produced in that economy. And that is how people are stolen from effectively, how people are taxed in that inflation tax that is invisible but very, very noticeable in your wallet from month to month.
Government uses word inflation, but if I understood well, the big problem is in the supply, the amount of money that they bring into the system and offer to people, right?
So that is what causes the whole problem, that you can create more money very easily to fulfill all the things you've promised. Governments love to promise things because they love to be re-elected, because they love the position of power and of being in control of everything. So if you make lots of promises and if you cause lots of expenses, and last not least, war is a huge government expense that can only be financed through central banks. Jump back, that was one of the reasons why central banking was invented in the 17th century, to facilitate war spending in order, well, essentially to steal from people the productive output of their work in order to redirect it into war economy. So those are the reasons why we essentially face that huge amount of money that causes the price inflation. So we should really use two words. We should use the monetary inflation, which means the monetary quantity gets blown up, and then the consequence of that will be the price inflation, because more goods, more money chases the same goods.
So on one side we have money supply, on the other side we have debt. As money supply increases, does this debt increase?
The debt increases because the debt is the backing of the money. So think back to what I said about the balance sheet. The balance sheet is no longer gold on the asset side, money on the liability side, but the assets are now government debt, which is an asset seen from the other side of the medal, and money on the other side. So that is why we see those unbelievably increasing sovereign debt numbers, and that is stunning. If you look at it, there is one illustration I love to use, the last 125 years of US sovereign debt, and the graph looks like the Burj Khalifa, so like that. And we're at 36 trillion now, which is unbelievable. In that same graph, you see that it took the United States about 200 years to reach 1 trillion of national sovereign debt. From 1 trillion to 36 trillion, it took only about 45 years. So you might ask, where is this going to end, or what is the limit of that? We don't know. The one thing we do know is that it always lasts longer than we think. So whenever a company is about to go bankrupt, it'll last for much longer than you think. Whenever something is coming to an end, it might drag on for longer. Just the end of the Soviet Union and its associated economies come to my mind. We all thought this was going to last forever, even though everybody knew that these economies were not sustainable. And then it ended overnight on November 9th of 1989, for the Germans at least. So everything might last forever, it seems, and then it might collapse very quickly. However, don't dare to forecast when this will happen. It'll probably drag on for longer than we think.
So we cannot know like exact time when this, like say, financial crash will happen, and like how far?
Well, we don't even know if there will be a financial crash. See, this is all stuff that never happened before, and it'll be really hard to forecast anything here. The only thing what we can say is that the way it is going into absolute absurdity. Because $36 trillion are, for example, an amount that is so absurdly high that nobody can actually expect that this will ever be paid back. This will just be rolled on. It will increase. It will have to increase to more because of the nature of this debt. So it will never go down. It will always go up. Now, the question is, what will happen if it goes up? Will it still be used? The dollar could be used, arguably, as a medium of exchange. It will just entirely lose any purpose as a store of value. So there may also be a non-catastrophic end to that, just a sort of quiet transition into another system.
What are some challenges, like I, as a young individual, that time is ahead of me, like what are some issues that I'm facing right now with this system?
Your issue is that you will have a hard time building wealth. Your parents or former generations started when they were 18 also with essentially nothing but their wits and their power. And then they could build step by step some wealth. They could acquire land, they could acquire a house, they could equip their household and so forth. This is fine as long as nobody takes the purchasing power out of your pocket that you've just worked for. This is now a new feature. You, as young people, will have to face that you will have to run in the hamster wheel to just stay on one position, let alone to acquire wealth. And that will be very frustrating and very unsettling for the young generation. That is why we spoke about this as the mission at the beginning of our talk, why this is so important for young people to understand, that they are being had by the system.
You mentioned that we get in this hamster wheel. Is there a solution that we get out of it, and that in different way we create our wealth and not constantly be in this wheel, to get some kind of out of it?
So the question would be, or the answer to this question would be, How can I preserve my purchasing power? And the rich people I mentioned before are using, for example, real estate for that. However, we have a better solution since 2009, and that is hard money in the form of Bitcoin. So Bitcoin is the invention of digital scarcity. Digital scarcity is almost an oxymoron because if it's digital, it can be copied freely. But for the first time, we now have a form of digital scarcity in the Bitcoin protocol, and that makes this digital scarcity uniquely usable as money. So by using hard money in the form of Bitcoin, you have essentially an escape hatch, as Christine Lagarde called it, from the fiat system. You can no longer be stolen from if your wealth is not kept in euros or in US dollars. And that is where education needs to lead you as young people, and that is what I see as my job.
Can you explain more, like, from perspective, something to be money, it needs to have value. So why does Bitcoin have value?
Very easy to explain. Let's come back to the monetary properties that we spoke about a while ago. So I said I usually refer to 5 of them. You could enumerate more, but let's stick with 5. Bitcoin, in every single one, is better than all its competitors. It is super divisible. It is durable, because as long as the Bitcoin protocol runs, and that means as long as we have electricity and the internet to communicate on, Bitcoin will work just fine. Then it is portable as easily as an electron through the ether. And then finally, it is recognizable, because whether you do or you do not hold a chunk of Bitcoin will be determined by the Bitcoin protocol itself without any doubt. And finally, of course, the most important one, it is scarce. If you understand the technology, you will understand that its supply is incredibly limited to these 21 million or 2.1 quadrillion satoshis if we look at the lower unit. And just in case anybody worries, those satoshis could be subdivided further if need be. For example, as we do already on the level 2 of Bitcoin, the Lightning Network, where we actually have the possibility of accounting for micro satoshis. That means a thousandth of a satoshi.
When we talk about, we mentioned some problems as inflation, debt, centralized system. How does Bitcoin solve these problems in the way, how does it acquire wealth, and what is there something that we don't see? Like
Bitcoin is not a debt-backed money. It is a bearer asset, and that makes all the difference. So since it fulfills those 5 monetary qualities so incredibly well, people use it for the reason that I sketched at the very beginning, to coordinate their exchange. Everybody is specialized, everybody needs to trade their goods for other goods, and for that, Bitcoin works tremendously well. It literally is the best store of value that we can imagine. Michael Saylor always says Bitcoin is Manhattan in cyberspace. So it is like buying a block of Manhattan before Manhattan became what it is today. So it is a supremely qualified store of value, and over time will acquire the other monetary functions as well. You can use it as a medium of exchange today. I have used it 2 weeks ago at a Bitcoin conference to buy coffee, and I regret it already. So while we are in this dramatically dynamic adoption phase of Bitcoin, where it acquires value through more people joining the Bitcoin network, it's no fun to use it as a means of exchange because what I paid in the beginning of November for my coffee is probably twice as much, or I don't know how much it went up. Important information, Bitcoin going up in value is not the reason why we are interested in Bitcoin. We are interested in it as the monetary alternative that allows fair exchange between all its participants.
You mentioned Michael Saylor. Can you give us some examples? How does he leverage Bitcoin for his company? And can you give us, are there examples of government leveraging it or some other companies that they do?
Michael Saylor is a very remarkable man in that he was the first businessman to discover the incredible potential that Bitcoin has as a store of value and as a treasury reserve asset on a corporate level. That was in summer of 2020. And ever since then, he has systematically transformed his company, MicroStrategy, into a Bitcoin holding company that has literally changed the nature of this company, in the course of which he also made MicroStrategy the best performing American stock. Something that goes largely unnoticed by the broader public. And so everybody wonders, if he's so successful with it, why doesn't everybody do it? Well, one of the reasons is you need to understand it. And that requires 100 hours, as he says, to understand Bitcoin, the asset. And then you need to be able to do it in your company because you will have to convince a number of levels of decision makers in a normal corporate governance structure. In the case of MicroStrategy, he was at an advantage because he was the founder and still the majority owner. So that went a lot smoother than it would go in a broadly held company like the huge companies that everybody thinks of that have literally billions of cash that could be transferred into a better asset, but is not because it is hard to bring everybody in a row on this topic. Now you mentioned states. Obviously what works on a corporate level would work on a state level, and we are about to see whether Trump delivers on his promises of creating a Bitcoin strategic reserves for the United States. There is a US senator from Wyoming, her name is Cynthia Lummis, who does excellent work in that area and who has come up with a proposal. In a nutshell, the proposal could lead to the elimination of sovereign debt through the use of a Bitcoin strategic reserve, and that's of course all way too complex to lay it out in 1 minute here at the table, but there are very interesting, promising use cases potentially up there in the future. And the interesting thing is, this is all the advantage of the first mover. So whoever does it first has the most benefit, just like MicroStrategy is probably far ahead of the game if ever any other company like Google, Apple, Meta, Microsoft would jump on that train, they would have a hard time ever catching a Michael Saylor's company. And the same would be true for a nation state adopting Bitcoin. Once a big one has started, then the others will only be able to collect the crumbs.
When we talk about the nations, is El Salvador a good example? They have started investing and keeping Bitcoin as a treasury reserve, and so far it looks great for them.
Another pioneer, just like Michael Saylor is the pioneer of corporate adoption, Nayib Bukele, the president of El Salvador, is the first nation state adopter, the first leader of a government that understood this, that put in the work to understood it, and to put Bitcoin to work for the benefit of his country's finances. And again, just like in the case of MicroStrategy, El Salvador is a small country. MicroStrategy is a comparatively small company, and in both cases there was one person who understood the thing and was able to get this going. Those are the pioneers, and now I am curious to see who are going to be the next adopters in line. I'm sure we'll be seeing much of that maybe in this coming year. Michael Saylor says the year 2025 is the year of institutional adoption of Bitcoin as he sees it.
We mentioned Bitcoin, we explained why does it have value, we explained how companies can acquire it and how nations can. Can you touch on some challenges that Bitcoin is facing in the future or right now?
No.
No challenges?
I think the story is that Bitcoin comes to those who need to know. And that's another adage from Michael Saylor. And it means that you need to put in the work to understand it, and once you do, then you will be able to benefit from it. And if you don't, you don't have to. Bitcoin is for anyone, but not for everyone. And those who are willing to put in the work can benefit, and those who don't. There is no particular challenge in the sense that no state can stop it. States can close the on-ramps and the off-ramps. What they will achieve by that is they will not stop Bitcoin or stop their people from using Bitcoin, but they will exclude themselves from the benefits of Bitcoin. So either way, I am very optimistic, I should say, about the future of this technology.
Finally, what is your vision for the future of education in the area of Bitcoin, and how can students prepare for challenges and opportunities ahead of them?
That is a very dear topic to myself, and I am advocating very much the inclusion of Bitcoin in the curricula of higher education or generally of the formal educational system. Just today I had a conversation in class with high school students who came to visit our college, and my first warm-up question to them was, what about money did you learn at school? Well, nothing. Nobody teaches them anything about money, and I think I have laid out in much detail how important knowing about money is in order to safeguard yourself from its unexpected side effects. So what is important for young people is to study this, and to study both how money works in the fiat sense and what alternative do we have available in Bitcoin. This is in principle something everybody can do themselves, but it will be hard, honestly, to not fall for all the scams and for all the Ponzi schemes and for all the poor information out there publicly available on sources like YouTube. So be careful and look for authentic sources, or if you're lucky and your educational institution offers that, take a course that teaches you about money and Bitcoin. I have pioneered this at RIT Croatia, and I hope to put RIT Croatia on the map as the Bitcoin place, at least in the region of ex-Yugoslavia, and it's going quite well right now because I'm not aware that any other school anywhere near us teaches something like that. As a matter of fact, not even our mother campus in Rochester has a course like the one we have here in Zagreb. Now, there's one more important thing. Bitcoin is for everyone in the sense that everyone should be studying this. And not only students that study economics. These should be students, every student should be studying Bitcoin because they're a young person. That is the key. It affects everybody. It affects students of any of our programs, whether they be in web and mobile computing, whether they be in new media design or soon in cybersecurity. all these people will every day deal with money. They will deal with the same difficulties that every young person has to build a future, to acquire wealth, and to live a beautiful life. And that is why it is inevitable that they study how that works under the conditions that they find in the 20s of the 21st century.
Professor, thank you very much for joining us today. I wish you all the luck for the future education and transferring knowledge to young people. And I'll be happy to have you for more technical lecture in the future.
I'd be happy to return in more detail because Bitcoin is something that requires a lot of responsibility from the user. So it's a good thing that you mentioned technical topics. Thank you for having me, and I very much enjoyed talking about this as always.
Thank you.
Thank you.